Welcome, everybody. Today I have a wonderful guest by the name of Ludumo Magangane. He is a choir master, author, teacher, singer, father, family man, and from Springs in South Africa and Kwatema. And as all of you probably know, or many of you know, I'm deeply fascinated with singing and group singing together. And Luduma knows a lot about that in the South African context. So I wanted just to ask you a question. And my first question is, and I'm just going to throw some questions at you and we'll just see what happens. My first question is, African and specifically South African choir singing, what makes it unique or different maybe from European or other kinds of choir singing?
I think it's because, I'll maybe arrogantly say, we've got the gift of the voice. It comes naturally. It comes naturally. We don't have to maybe train that much. Yes, we've got to train if we're going to engage in Western choral music. But in my whole life, I think I auditioned choristers only once when I was conducting a choir in the then Rand Afrikaans University. But generally, I never used to audition. I would just collect people and then train them. Even at school, I would do that. And then select the best choir to represent the school. And that type of thing.
I have to ask you a question about that because that's a huge statement already, and I love it. So, what you're saying is that pretty much everybody who came could sing.
Yes, to a large extent could sing, and they wanted to sing. Look, in a choir of 60, as an amateur choir conductor or as a conductor of amateur choirs, you know that it's not all the 60 who are actually carrying the choir. Probably it could be about 40 people or so who are really doing the job. The others are there because maybe the voice is small or whatever. They can hear the note and they can stay in pitch and all that. So you put them there. It's unlike maybe an ensemble where you need 20 singers and all 20 of them have got to deliver for the sing. That's a different ballgame altogether.
Okay, so then tell me then what happens in church when everyone's invited to sing. And is that different? Or does that also work?
In a church situation now, in fact, many of our choirs, whether in a church situation or in a school situation, have always sung generally a cappella. Not all our churches have got pianos or church organs. But then because of the tradition of singing in schools, the tradition of being able to harmonize naturally, the singing in our churches is not carried by an instrument most of the time. There will be a choir to make sure that people know the hymns and all that and lead the hymn singing. But when the congregation knows the hymn, then they'll join in the various voices without anybody indicating this is the tenor, this is the soprano, this is the alto, this is the bass.
So in other words, people just know which vocal part to take. And also, do you also simultaneously have potentially in those songs sometimes call and response happening and people know where to sing as well?
Yes, you do have that. Some of it comes spontaneously. Somebody just comes up with a line, a religious line, and then maybe teaches one or two people. Then everybody simply joins. They know when to come in, which sometimes causes problems because you find that the rest of the congregation knows the response part, and the main melody and the main lyrics are carried by the caller. So all the time in all the verses, the choir brings in whatever line, and then we join in the chorus part, which almost remains the same all the time.
So Luduma, but then I want to ask you, because are you saying that frequently there's spontaneous, made up, on the spot singing that an entire choir of just normal, or not an choir, an entire congregation can just jump into, we don't know what's going to happen next, but we're going to sing the line and everybody is comfortable to to sing like that?
Well, let me not put it as if every Sunday that type of thing happens. There are choruses that are well known by the congregation, but then you'll find that you do know who has come up with those choruses. Unlike our African folk music, where we say it's in the domain, everybody knows it. But even in that case, even if everybody knows it, somebody somewhere did start there. It just didn't come up on its own. So you find that in cases where you get into maybe a different congregation you're visiting, you just need to keep quiet for just 1 or 2 minutes to pick up what it is that they're singing. And then definitely if it's a chorus, you as a musical person, you'll be able to jump in later on and then sing together with them. But generally, it doesn't become too difficult, except again when we sing the old hymns that were given by the missionaries, the English hymns, then you need to have something that you can fall back on. But if it's an African chorus, now chorus is different from chorus in the Western sense, because if I conduct Handel's Messiah, I know that it will be the overture, and then it will be the tenor solo doing comforting my people, everybody, and then the chorus and the glory of the Lord. Now, with choruses in the township, we are talking about a religious rendition, which is not a hymn necessarily, but it carries just a short line, which keeps, gets repeated most of the time, and it can be repeated for the next 5 minutes, depending on the mood of the congregation and what is being done.
Oh, I love that. So now I want to ask you then a question. As a spiritual man, when people are singing like this and singing these choruses, what does singing this music with these words to God, what does it do? What does it do in their bodies? What does it do in their hearts? What happens?
I actually reminded me of what I did say to my church choir one day. I said to them, look, when we sing, we've got, everything goes to the heart. It's spiritual, but we've also got to connect, because you need to, as you sing, interrogate the lyrics and find out what it is that you are saying. Are you talking directly to God? And if the answer is yes, are you praising? Are you making a request? Or are you talking about God to somebody else? Are you preaching in the form of singing, in other words? So you've got to know exactly what it is that you're doing, and then get your heart and spirit in the whole thing that you're doing, so that you don't. I sometimes say don't miss the opportunity to praise because of the music. Sometimes we get lost in the exuberance of the singing and forget that there's always got to be that connection as you sing, because you've come so that you can be in the spiritual realm with your Creator. So don't lose that connection because of the music that is causing you maybe to jive around, because we always move around.
Right. And I love that. So if I'm right in what you're saying, firstly, that the music is also transporting people into joy. As you say, they're jiving and moving. But are you asking them then to connect with their intention, to know why they're doing? In other words, one song might be, as you say, a praising song. Another might be an asking song, and to connect both heart and body that is moving plus mind.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking. There are a few times where we just simply don't move, because the moving thing. I think if I'm maybe speaking out of correction, but I think I'm right, that the Methodist Church in the townships is the one that brought in the movement. In the past, the singing was still Calvinistic in terms of you stand there and then sing all 5, 4, 3, 6 verses of a hymn or whatever. But then generally people, it's as if when you want them to sing like that, if they sing a hymn, you actually are keeping them chained. And the minute you give them a hymn that allows them movement, then they kind of become free and be at home. Now, we've seen other denominations copy that, where you find you get to an Anglican church, then the next thing you realize, but they're singing, the Methodist side, because it's so enjoyable to sing in there. Not but then denominations will then keep changing and go back to what is traditionally their way of singing. But they will not leave church without having done something that makes them just loosen up and dance around.
If you were to describe the difference between the Methodist Church in Springs, the main town, and Kwatema, the township where you originally come from, if you went on a Sunday, what would the feeling difference be between the two, and which would you rather be at?
The Methodist Church in town would rather be too quiet. Not that they don't sing, they do sing, but most of the time it will be with, it kind of, the music there almost is like a bit of pop, a little bit, depending on who it does compose the music and whatever. So whenever and it's not too many times, but whenever I do visit or I am supposed to visit for a reason, you do feel I feel like I could just rush back home just for this little part, where I'll sing and be able to loosen up and do it. So even as I said last time, we stay in a suburb, but we worship in the township.
Well, I want to ask you. Yeah, because but I just think that there's something so important in what you're saying there, because in my experience in Western people, there's a lot of people whose voices have closed, and also Western people don't dance very much, and it's very much a lot of that Calvinist stuff that across the whole culture, and the joy of singing and the joy of movement is often shut down, and a lot of my work is helping people find that joy again. And as you're saying, the community in Kwatema, there that in the Methodist Church, there that movement and singing is natural and part of worship, and would you say it's a positive and beautiful part of the worship?
It's a very positive part of the worship. In fact, one of our ministers used to say, sometimes you'll find that there are people in the congregation who almost for the whole week didn't experience happiness for some reason, whether at home, at work, or whatever the case may be. And then allow them, he would actually say, allow people to express themselves in church, because this is the only place for some people where they become happy.
That is so powerful. That is so powerful. And I think then you take that out, and imagine some people, for example, potentially in the West, who never sing and never dance. Where do they find joy?
Yeah, that becomes difficult.
So I want to ask you a question, which is, as a child, how did song and dance fit into your life? At what age did you start moving your body when doing things? At what stage did you sing? And in what circumstances, or was it always around? What was it like in your culture?
When I grew up, music was always around me. My mother would always, she was a very devout Christian, and half the time, if she sang, whether she was cooking or ironing clothes or whatever, she would sing hymns. So from a childhood stage, I learned the hymns from her before learning them in church. And when every day when we went to bed, we would then, before praying, we would then sing. So it was always, the singing was always there. We are born into rhythm. Because the first time we get rhythm is when we are being rocked. You're being rocked by your mother as a baby, rocked to sleep. Now that's rhythm. Or if she is working and you are not asleep, but she wants to go through all these chores. She puts you at her back, and if you try and cry a little bit, then she'll start moving to rock you to quietness, or even start singing as she's rocking, as she's going through. Now, that's what black mothers have always done all the years. The reason I'm saying we're born into rhythm is because one of my travels, I went to Malawi some years back. And now, when I go out of South Africa and go to an African country, I always want to see how they do their African singing and folk dancing. So I met a group of Malawian ladies, all black except one lady who came from Canada, who had been in Malawi. Well, I didn't know at that time how long she had been. So they started singing an indigenous Malawian song, and they started moving. And then I saw this Canadian white lady doing exactly the same thing that they were doing. And I was fascinated because all the years I was told we are born with rhythm and whites don't have rhythm. Now here's a white from Canada moving like the Malawians. So when they finished singing, I went over to her and I asked her, how do you do it? And she said, well, I've been here for 15 years. I said, okay, you need not go further. So it's a matter of being in or immersed in that culture, and then you try and pick it up and learn whatever you can. So as human beings, if we give ourselves a chance, we can move.
And as human beings, if given the chance, we can sing. You know, yes. It's the same thing. I think that is the most perfect description of it. You know, as I've said, with my work, I encounter these broken or frozen voices, and it's, you know, everyone can learn to move, everyone can learn to sing, and I believe it's one of the gifts of South African and African culture is to remind the world that there's joy in singing, and joy in singing together, and joy in singing together spiritually and in worship, you could say. And it's something that in many countries people have forgotten. And I think, anyway, so thank you so much for sharing all of this today. That's all my questions. I want to just share with the audience also to say that I'm going to share a link below to Ledumo's book, which is called The National Anthem of South Africa, which is about the history of the national anthem. You can order the Kindle version or the physical version from Amazon. Yeah, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for making time.
The pleasure is mine.
Yeah, thank you. That's all my questions.
Oh, nice.